They thought my lawn was their shortcut, a casual path for HOA members to stroll across whenever they pleased. At first, I didn't mind the occasional trespass. But when Karen, the self-proclaimed neighborhood president, marched across with her dog and had the nerve to tell me to keep my grass trimmed better for walking, something snapped. That's when I decided to give her a surprise she'd never forget. You see, my property wasn't just an ordinary lawn. It sat on a private parcel registered under a state preservation program, with a few creative modifications I'd recently added. So when Karen and her friends tried their usual shortcut the next morning, they didn't find the quiet green path they were used to. They found themselves in the middle of a setup so shocking, so unforgettable. It left the entire HOA questioning if they'd ever step on my lawn again. Asterisk. When I first moved into Cedar Ridge Estates, I thought I had found the perfect place to finally slow down and breathe. The neighborhood brochure called it the most peaceful community in the county, with tree-lined streets, a sparkling pond, and friendly neighbors who waved as they passed by. My house sat on the corner of Maple Bend, a cozy single-story ranch with white siding, blue shutters, and a stretch of bright green lawn that I took a quiet kind of pride in. I'd always enjoyed working outdoors, cutting the grass, planting flowers, shaping the hedges into neat curves. It wasn't about showing off. It just felt good to look out the window and see something I'd cared for with my own hands. At first, everything seemed perfect. I'd wake up early, make coffee, and sit by the bay window overlooking the yard. The morning sun would light up the dew on the grass like a blanket of diamonds. Then, one morning, I saw a man in jogging clothes run right across my lawn. He didn't even glance my way. I assumed maybe he was lost or cutting through by accident. But then another one came the next day. And the next. Soon, it wasn't just joggers. It was kids on bikes, people walking their dogs, even a couple who stopped right in the middle of my yard to chat. At first, I didn't make a big deal of it. They'll stop once they realize, I told myself. But they didn't. If anything, it got worse. By the end of the month, my yard looked like it had a faint dirt path worn through the grass, a trail from the corner sidewalk straight to the street on the other side. It wasn't just annoying. It felt like my home was being treated like a public park. One Saturday morning, I stepped outside just in time to see a middle-aged woman walking briskly across my lawn with a little white dog tugging at its leash. I called out politely, "Hey there, sorry, but that's private property." She stopped, turned, and gave me this tight, dismissive smile. "Oh, I'm Karen," she said, as if her name was supposed to explain everything. "I'm the HOA president. We've always used this path. It's kind of a neighborhood tradition." I raised an eyebrow. "A tradition? Across my lawn?" She gave a small laugh, like I was being ridiculous. "Don't be so uptight. Everyone does it. You'll get used to it." And just like that, she kept walking. That was the first time I met Karen, and I knew immediately what kind of person she was. The kind who believed that community rules only applied when they benefited her. Over the next week, I saw her more often. She'd march across the grass every morning with that same dog, sipping her coffee and waving to anyone who passed. The kicker? She started bringing her friends with her. By the third week, I'd had enough. I went down to the local hardware store, bought a small private property "Please do not trespass" sign, and staked it right near the path. Simple, polite, and clear. That same afternoon, I went out to check my mailbox and saw the sign was gone, vanished. All that remained was a patch of disturbed soil, where it had been pulled out. The next day, I spotted Karen standing with 2 other HOA members by my hedge, chatting casually as if nothing had happened. I walked up and asked if anyone had seen my sign. Karen didn't even hesitate. "Oh, that tacky thing. I took it down. It didn't fit the neighborhood's aesthetic." I stared at her in disbelief. "You took it down?" She nodded like she'd done me a favor. "We like to keep a certain look around here. Lawn signs make things feel cluttered." That night, I sat on my porch, too angry to even enjoy the cool breeze. Every time I heard footsteps crunching on the grass, it was like nails on a chalkboard. I kept thinking, how hard is it to just use the sidewalk like normal people? I didn't buy this house to be the neighborhood shortcut. The next morning I tried talking to her again. "Karen, I'm serious," I said as calmly as I could. "This is private property. I'm asking nicely, please tell people not to walk across." Her smile didn't even waver. "You're a part of a community now," she said in that condescending tone. "You need to be neighborly. It's just a bit of grass, isn't it?" "It's my grass," I shot back. She gave me a look that said she wasn't used to being challenged. "If it bothers you that much, bring it up at the next HOA meeting. But I'll warn you, this path has been here longer than you." That line stuck with me all day. Longer than me. As if living here for a few months meant I had no rights. As if her authority mattered more than property law. I did go to that HOA meeting a week later, held in the community clubhouse. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet, and about a dozen neighbors sat in folding chairs. When my turn came to speak, I explained calmly that I didn't appreciate people walking across my lawn and that it needed to stop. Karen let me finish, then stood up with that smug smile plastered across her face. "While we appreciate your concern," she said sweetly, "the board has discussed this before. That area has always been considered a shared access path. We'll maintain it as such for the benefit of the community." A few people nodded, Others looked uncomfortable but stayed quiet. I felt heat rising in my face. Shared access. They were literally trespassing on private land. But I could see the smug look of victory on Karen's face as she tapped her pen against the table. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying her words in my head: be neighborly, shared access. For the community, I realized then that reasoning with her wouldn't work. She didn't respect boundaries. She only respected power. And if she thought I was just going to let her walk all over me and my lawn, she was about to learn that I wasn't that kind of neighbor. After that HOA meeting, things in Cedar Ridge Estates felt different. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel the stares. Neighbors who once waved now glanced away awkwardly. Some probably thought I was overreacting, while others were too afraid to go against Karen. She had a way of making people follow her lead. Her fake politeness and sugary voice hid a sharpness that scared most folks into agreement. I'd seen that kind of power before, the kind that fed on compliance. But this time, she had picked the wrong lawn to trample on. For a few days, I tried to ignore it. I focused on my work, stayed busy around the house, and tried not to think about the path cutting through my grass like an open wound. But every morning, right around 7, the same pattern continued. The sound of shoes crunching on wet grass, dogs barking, and the occasional burst of laughter from Karen and her morning walking group. They strutted across my yard as if the HOA had handed them a written invitation. One morning, I opened my blinds and saw her again, in her spotless tracksuit, coffee mug in hand, chatting away with another woman as her dog relieved itself right near my rose bushes. That was the final straw. I went out, walked straight to the edge of the porch, and called out, "Hey, you need to keep your dog off my property." Karen turned, looking as though she'd been mildly inconvenienced by a bug buzzing near her ear. "Relax," she said. "It's just grass. I'll pick it up." "That's not the point," I said, trying to stay calm. "You shouldn't even be on my property. This isn't a walking trail." Her friend gave a little scoff. "He's serious," she said under her breath. Like it was the funniest thing in the world. Got Karen sighed dramatically. "You really need to lighten up. You can't expect everyone to walk all the way around the block. This path's been here for years." "I don't care how long it's been here," I said, stepping closer. "It's not yours to use." For the first time, her smile faltered. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. You're new here, so let me give you some advice. Don't start fights with the HOA. It never ends well for the homeowner." That last part hit like a warning, not advice. She turned on her heel, tugging her dog along, and kept walking. I stood there for a long moment, fists clenched, heart pounding. She was daring me to push back, confident that the HOA would always back her up. That evening, I decided to do some research. I spent hours combing through the community bylaws, the county zoning maps, and the property survey papers I got when I bought the house. What I found made my blood boil. The HOA had no legal claim to my yard. The property line clearly extended to the sidewalk, and there was no designated easement, public path, or community access of any kind. In fact, the county registry listed my lot as part of a protected watershed zone because of the small pond behind it. That meant any interference or foot traffic could be considered a violation of environmental guidelines. It was the perfect loophole. Karen thought she could hide behind HOA rules, but state laws trumped her every time. The next morning, I printed copies of my property documents and slid one into the HOA's mailbox, addressed to Karen Thompson, President. I highlighted the sections about private ownership and the environmental note. Then I waited. She didn't disappoint. By noon, she was pounding on my door, face flushed red with anger. "Do you think you can threaten me with paperwork?" she snapped the moment I opened the door. I stayed calm. "Not a threat, just facts. You're trespassing on state-protected land." Karen, her jaw tightened. "This isn't over. You can't just take away something that's been part of our community for years." "Watch me," I said, and shut the door. Later that evening, I saw her gathering a few neighbors by the clubhouse. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough to know she was trying to spin the story, painting me as the uncooperative new homeowner who didn't care about neighborhood traditions. A few people nodded along, others just shrugged, but I could tell her influence was slipping. She thrived on control, and nothing scared her more than someone who didn't bow to it. Over the next few days, the tension grew. Some mornings were quiet, no trespassers, no dogs, no Karen. I almost thought I'd won. But then one evening, while I was grilling in the backyard, I noticed something glinting near the bushes. When I walked closer, I realized someone had stuck a small stake with a laminated paper on it. It read, "Community Walking Path, HOA Maintained." I couldn't believe it. She'd actually labeled my lawn as an HOA feature. I pulled the stake out, tossed it in the trash, and laughed under my breath. If she wanted to play games, Fina could play too. That night, I sat at my desk sketching out ideas. I wasn't going to waste energy yelling or arguing anymore. No. I was going to make it impossible for them to ever step foot on my lawn again without breaking a single law. I began making a list. Motion sensors, sprinklers, boundary markers, maybe even a few wildlife protection signs. Nothing dangerous, but enough to teach Karen a lesson she wouldn't forget. As I wrote, I couldn't help but smile. She thought she owned the neighborhood, but I had something she didn't: patience. precision, and proof that the land was mine. The next phase wasn't about confrontation anymore. It was about preparation. For years, Karen had probably gotten away with pushing her authority on everyone else. But this time, her arrogance had met a homeowner who knew how to fight smart. She wanted a battle for control, but what she was about to walk into wasn't a war, it was a trap. And the best part? She'd walk right into it herself, just like she always did, right across the middle of my lawn. By the time the weekend rolled around, I was done being polite. The HOA had twisted rules, ignored property lines, and mocked me at meetings. But I wasn't about to roll over. I had a plan, one that would teach Karen and her followers a lesson without a single angry word exchanged. I wanted results, not arguments. So, on Saturday morning, with the fall breeze rustling through the maple trees, I got to work. I started by walking the perimeter of my yard, measuring and marking a few spots with small flags. My goal was simple: install a motion-triggered sprinkler system, one that would activate the second someone stepped over the boundary line. It wasn't harmful, it wasn't loud, but it would be effective. I'd seen these systems before, silent guardians of gardens, designed to keep deer and raccoons away. But in my case, they'd be keeping away a more persistent pest, the HOA president. The next step was ordering the equipment. I found exactly what I needed online: industrial-grade motion sensors, adjustable sprinkler heads with high-pressure spray, and a control unit I could hide behind my rose bushes. It arrived 2 days later in a series of neatly packed boxes. I smiled as I carried them inside, feeling that spark of satisfaction that comes when you know you're taking back control. That night, as I unpacked the boxers on my living room floor, I thought about how far things had gone. It wasn't just about a lawn anymore, it was about respect. Karen had made it clear she thought her position gave her the right to trample over anyone she pleased. But people like her only understand one thing: consequences. Sunday morning, I got up early, long before anyone else in the neighborhood stirred. The sky was still a soft pink, and dew coated the grass. I set up my tools quietly, digging shallow trenches along the edge of the path where most people crossed. Every few feet, I installed a sprinkler head, connected them to the water supply, and ran wires to the motion sensors hidden in the hedges. It took most of the morning, but by noon, it was ready. I turned it on, tested the system, and watched with satisfaction as powerful jets of water burst across the grass in perfect sequence. The sensors worked flawlessly. Anything moving within 15 feet of the boundary would trigger an automatic spray. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to make sure this wasn't just a physical deterrent but a psychological one too. I printed out a few realistic wildlife signs: protected turtle nesting zone, do not enter; state conservation area, surveillance in use, and violators subject to fine. I laminated them, mounted them on wooden stakes, and planted them neatly around the edge of the lawn. It gave the area an official look, legitimate enough to make anyone think twice. By mid-afternoon, I stood back and admired my handiwork. The yard looked the same, clean, quiet, and green, but beneath that calm surface, it was now an invisible fortress. I even installed a small outdoor camera system connected to my phone, aimed directly at the main crossing point. I wanted to see Karen's reaction the moment she tried her usual shortcut, and I knew she would. Karen was predictable that way. Her ego couldn't resist testing boundaries. If she saw the signs, she'd probably laugh them off. If she saw the sprinklers, she'd think they were for gardening. But once those sensors picked her up, well, she'd learn the hard way that the lawn wasn't hers to walk on. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cold drink, watching the sunset paint the neighborhood in gold. A few houses down, I could see Karen in her driveway, chatting with 2 other HOA members. She gestured toward my yard more than once, clearly talking about me. I didn't need to hear her words to know what she was saying. Probably something like, "He's overreacting," or "We'll see how long he lasts." I just smiled. Let her talk. The next morning, the yard would speak for itself. When I went to bed that night, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Peace. For the first time since moving in, I wasn't angry or frustrated. I knew I'd handled it smartly, without shouting matches or legal threats. It was quiet justice, the kind that made its point without ever raising its voice. The following morning, I woke early and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. I sat by the window, mug in hand, waiting. At exactly 7:02 a.m., I saw Karen in her usual pastel tracksuit, sunglasses perched on her nose, her little white dog trotting ahead of her. She looked confident, maybe even smug, as if she were about to prove some point. She glanced at the new signs, rolled her eyes, and stepped onto the lawn. I grinned. The sensors clicked on. A split second later, the sprinklers erupted. Powerful jets of water shot up from the grass, arching in perfect timing to cover the entire path. Karen froze, shrieked, and stumbled backward as water drenched her from head to toe. Her dog barked wildly, spinning in circles as more sprays hit from both sides. For a moment, she tried to run forward, but the system followed her every move, tracking her like a spotlight. I nearly spat out my coffee, laughing. She waved her arms wildly, shouting something I couldn't hear through the glass, and finally fled back to the sidewalk, soaked, furious, and sputtering. I watched as she stood there, drenched and humiliated, looking back at my yard like it had betrayed her personally. Then I noticed the other neighbors to joggers, an older couple standing nearby, watching the entire thing unfold. One of them clapped. The others tried to hide their smiles. It was a small moment of silent rebellion against the woman who had bullied them for years. I leaned back in my chair, satisfied. The message was clear now. My lawn wasn't a community path. It wasn't part of the HOA's authority. It was mine. And as the water from the sprinklers sparkled in the morning sun, I realized something else. This wasn't just about reclaiming property. It was about reclaiming peace. Karen wanted control. But now, every step she took across my grass would remind her who really owned the ground she walked on. The next morning felt electric. The air itself seemed to hum with anticipation, like the calm before a thunderstorm. I knew Karen wouldn't let yesterday's embarrassment slide. People like her never did. When control slipped through their fingers, they clawed for it even harder. So, I sat on my porch early that morning, a mug of coffee steaming in my hands, watching my lawn sparkle under the sunlight. The sprinklers were still wet from their test run, and I had already checked the camera feed twice to make sure everything was recording properly. I had a feeling today would be eventful. Sure enough, at precisely 7 o'clock, I saw her coming down the street, wearing a completely new tracksuit, bright purple this time, as if to reclaim her dignity through color. Her dog trotted along beside her, leash bouncing, while she carried a large cup of coffee and her phone in her other hand. Even from a distance, I could see her jaw was set. That stiff, determined stride said it all. She was coming for round two. A few other early risers were out too. Mr. Jenkins, who lived across the street, was collecting his newspaper, and a couple of joggers were stretching at the corner. Everyone noticed Karen. She had a way of making her presence known, her chin high like she owned the sidewalk itself. I could almost hear her rehearsing the confrontation in her head, planning what she'd say to put me in my place. She stopped at the edge of my lawn, took one look at the signs, and snorted. Protected turtle zone. Please. I heard her mutter. Then, without hesitation, she took that first step forward. The sensors clicked on. A split second later, a jet of icy water blasted up from the grass, catching her square in the stomach. She gasped, stumbled, and nearly dropped her coffee. The dog barked and tried to pull away, but the sprinklers didn't stop. One after another, they erupted in perfect rhythm, spraying high arcs that soaked everything in range. Karen screamed, spinning around to escape, but the motion sensors tracked her movement. Unleashing another round of sprays from behind, her coffee cup went flying, splattering across the pavement. She tried to shield herself with her phone, but that didn't help much when the next stream caught her full in the face. From my porch, I nearly spit out my coffee, laughing. It was pure, chaotic perfection, the great Karen flood in full motion. Her dog, terrified, bolted in circles around her ankles as she yelled, "Stop it. Turn it off right now." But I wasn't about to help. The sprinklers weren't controlled manually. They ran automatically for 90 seconds per activation. She'd just have to endure it. By the time the system stopped, Karen looked like she'd gone swimming in her clothes. Her hair clung to her cheeks, makeup running down her face, and her tracksuit was plastered to her skin. The dog shook itself violently, spraying even more water around. A small group of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk by now. Some were pretending to be out for their morning walk, but it was obvious why they were there. One of them, an older lady named Marlene, whispered something to her husband and covered her mouth to hide a grin. Karen saw them watching. Her face turned scarlet, a mix of rage and humiliation. She pointed a shaking finger toward my house. "This isn't over," she shouted, voice dripping with fury. "You can't do this to me. I'll have you removed from the H." I stood up slowly, setting my mug down, and leaned against the porch railing. "Karen," I called back. "Ms. Kube, you're trespassing. Again, you might want to check with the county before threatening me." That only made her angrier. She stomped away, dragging her soaked dog behind her, muttering something about lawsuits and unneighborly behavior. As she disappeared down the street, I could still hear the squish of her wet shoes. Later that morning, I checked the footage from my outdoor cameras. Every second of the incident was captured in crystal clear HD, from the first step onto the grass to her final retreat. I watched it twice, then uploaded it to a private homeowners network forum with a simple title: "The Great Karen Flood, HOA President versus Sprinkler System." Within hours, it spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. People commented with laughing emojis, gifs of rainstorms, and captions like "instant karma." And finally, someone stood up to her. By noon, everyone had seen Tevin, those who usually pretended not to get involved in HOA drama. That evening, I was watering the flowers when my neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, ambled over. "Son," he said with a grin, "I've lived here 15 years, and that's the first time I've seen Karen speechless. You might have just done the impossible." I laughed. "Guess I gave her a little taste of her own rules. She's been walking all over people for years," he said. "You just gave the rest of us hope." Over the next few days, something shifted in the neighborhood. People started walking around my lawn again. The shortcut vanished overnight. The once worn path began to grow fresh grass. Even better, neighbors who had kept their distance now stopped by to chat, curious and friendly. It was as if one act of defiance had cracked the spell Karen held over everyone. Karen, on the other hand, went quiet. No more morning walks across my yard, no more smug smiles or passive-aggressive notes. For once, she kept to herself. But I knew she wouldn't stay silent forever. Someone like her never truly admits defeat, they just wait for another opportunity to regain control. Still, that week was the most peaceful I'd had since moving in. Every time I sat on my porch and looked at that lush, untrampled grass, I couldn't help but grin. The sprinklers stood ready, silent and patient, their sensors watching like loyal guards. And whenever I thought about Karen storming home, dripping wet and fuming, I'd take another sip of coffee and think, sometimes, justice really does fall from the sky. In the days that followed the Great Karen Flood, the neighborhood settled into a strange but satisfying quiet. For the first time since I'd moved into Cedar Ridge Estates, I could sit on my porch and enjoy my coffee without watching people trample across my yard. The grass, once flattened by dozens of daily footsteps, had started to grow back lush and even. Birds returned to the hedges. The pond shimmered undisturbed, and for a brief moment, peace truly existed on Maple Bend. But I knew better than to think Karen would take her humiliation lying down. Sure enough, on the third day after her soaking, a neatly folded letter arrived in my mailbox, official HOA stationery, complete with a gold seal and Karen's elegant, looping signature. The letter accused me of conduct unbecoming of a resident and cited intentional disruption of community harmony. It demanded that I remove unauthorized sprinkler installations and obstructional signage within 7 days or face a fine. I almost laughed. The nerve of her! She was still trying to act like the queen of the neighborhood after being drenched like a wet cat in front of everyone. Instead of responding directly, I took the letter, placed it in a folder labeled evidence, and made one short phone call to the county environmental officer who'd helped me register the wildlife protection zone months ago. Within a few hours, he called me back, amused. "You're fine," he said. "She doesn't have jurisdiction over your property. If the HOA pushes it, just let me know. They'll be the ones getting fined." That evening, I printed out the official county report and slipped it into the HOA drop box with a sticky note that read, "Per your request, documentation enclosed. Kindly direct all further complaints to the State Environmental Department." I knew Karen would read that line over and over, grinding her teeth. 2 days later, the HOA mailbox spat out a new letter, this time from their attorney. It was carefully worded, suggesting a mutual resolution. Apparently, after checking with the county, they realized they were walking on very thin legal ice. I agreed to meet with their representative at the community center, just to see how far Karen would go to save face. When I walked into the meeting, the room was unusually tense. Karen was there, sitting at the end of the table with her arms folded tightly. Beside her was a younger man in a suit, the HOA's attorney. I sat opposite them, placing my folder of documents neatly on the table. "Mr. Lubis," the attorney began, "we're here today to ensure that both parties can coexist peacefully in the community." I nodded. "That's exactly what I want. Peace, on my property." Karen's lips twitched. "No one ever meant to cause trouble," she said, her tone forced and brittle. "It's just that people have always used that path. We were hoping for a compromise." I leaned forward slightly. "There is no compromise. My yard isn't a public space. It's not an HOA trail, not a community zone, and definitely not your shortcut. It's my land. I've got every legal right to protect it." The attorney cleared his throat. "Of course, we simply ask that your sprinkler system remain used for its intended purpose." Landscaping. I couldn't help but grin. "Oh, I assure you, it does exactly that." Karen glared at me, but she knew it was over. Her reign of power had met a wall when she couldn't cross without getting soaked again, literally and figuratively. The attorney sighed, shuffled his papers, and ended the meeting quickly, saying, "Then it seems we're all in agreement." As I stood to leave, I caught Karen's eye one last time. Her usual confidence was gone. There was no smugness, no smirk, just a tight, silent resentment. She muttered something like, "You've made your point," but I barely heard it. I just nodded politely and said, "Glad we could finally respect boundaries." When I walked out of the building, the afternoon sun felt warm on my face. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in months. The war was over. In the following weeks, word spread across Cedar Ridge that the HOA had officially acknowledged my property as private land. The shortcut was removed from community maps, and a quiet rule was passed: no pedestrian traffic across individually owned lots. It was a victory not just for me, but for every neighbor who'd ever been steamrolled by Karen's self-importance. Ironically, after that, people started treating me differently. Neighbors who once avoided me now waved when they passed. A few even stopped by to ask about the sprinkler system, chuckling as they admitted they'd secretly enjoyed watching Karen's soaking replayed on the Homeowner forum. Some even thanked me for standing up to her, something they'd never dared to do themselves. Karen, for her part, became noticeably quieter. She still led the HOA, but her voice no longer carried the same authority. She kept her distance, walking her dog only on the sidewalks now, eyes straight ahead, pretending she didn't see me whenever our paths crossed. I didn't need revenge beyond that. The silence itself was victory enough. One evening, a month later, I sat on my porch again, just as I had when this whole mess began. The yard was greener than ever, freshly mowed, not a single footprint out of place. The motion sprinklers glistened faintly in the golden sunset, silent and ready, though they hadn't needed to activate since that unforgettable morning. I took a slow sip of my coffee and smiled to myself. Sometimes, standing up for your space isn't about confrontation, it's about patience, persistence, and knowing when to let karma do the talking. The lawn that once felt like a battlefield had become a symbol of peace, and I wasn't about to let anyone walk all over it again. I learned one lasting truth from it all. Some people won't respect your boundaries until you make them impossible to ignore. And when you finally draw that line, make sure it's one they'll remember, especially if it sprays cold water at 60 psi. If you enjoyed this story and love powerful HOA reality tales like this one, make sure to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. For more gripping neighborhood dramas and satisfying homeowner wins, subscribe now to HOA Bright Reality.